Hundreds of bird species are endangered across the Americas, mostly due to the destruction of nesting sites. But Conor Knighton tells us about one species at risk from a very different threat.
The California condor is the largest flying land bird in North America. What it lacks in looks, it makes up for in majesty. Its 9.5-foot wingspan leaves quite an impression if you're lucky enough to ever see one. Or 20.
Cinda Mickles was away last weekend, and when she came home, she found that 15 to 20 condors had descended on her home in Tehachapi.
This scene, captured in May, would have been unthinkable just 3 decades ago. Back then, there wasn't a single condor left in the wild. In the late 1980s, the last few California condors in existence were brought into captivity to save the species from extinction. Since then, the vultures have been bred and slowly reintroduced into the wild. There are now more than 500 total, a number that is still small enough that biologists still number them all.
They're all here for a reason, and it's not a place you want your number, because these are birds that have passed.
Chris Parrish is the director of global conservation at the Peregrine Fund. While the reappearance of condors in our skies is certainly a success story, the endangered birds are still struggling. Researchers eventually learned why.
54% of all death in our population that we monitor that intensively is lead poisoning.
Lead is a dangerous neurotoxin. It's also what most ammunition is made out of. The birds are dying from bullets. They're not getting shot by them. They're literally eating lead.
Scavenging wildlife that are obligates, like the condor, they only consume things that are already dead.
Here's the problem. When hunters kill an animal, like a deer, they often leave behind some of the remains. But they may be unintentionally leaving behind tiny fragments of lead. Lead that ends up in the condors when they swing by to enjoy a meal.
Some of those tiny fragments that strip off of those bullets we've used for 100 years can poison wildlife.
In Marble Canyon, Arizona, Parrish's team traps and tests condors.
She's still high.
Most have detectable lead levels, so they treat the birds, then release them once they're healthy.
We're in a holding pattern. We've come to a real fine understanding of what the problem is, and we know how to solve it. Now we have to go solve it.
But solving this can feel like a long shot.
If this wound channel were in the thoracic cavity of a big game animal, this is what's happening in there, and that's where those fragments come from.
Parrish is on a mission to convince hunters to hunt with non-lead ammunition, like copper bullets, doing demonstrations across the country. It's a world he knows well.
I'm kind of a redneck hunter biologist, and these hunters are my people.
Unfortunately, copper ammunition is generally more expensive. It's harder to find, and it's just not what people are used to.
Changing tradition is hard. It's not as simple as, here's the science, here's the logic, so do the right thing.
In 2019, California instituted a statewide ban on lead ammunition for hunting. But the California condor is also found in Utah and Arizona, states where there aren't bans. Parrish doesn't believe a legislative solution is the answer.
We have a speed limit, but people break that law too. And I'm not saying the hunters are a bunch of bad actors. I'm just saying if they don't understand it, they might well write it off as a piece of unnecessary legislation that really isn't a problem.
It seems like a very difficult law to enforce when you're out in the woods.
Almost impossible.
Instead, Parrish favors a voluntary approach. He co-founded the North American Non-Lead Partnership to reach out to hunters. So far, the response has been encouraging. An estimated 90% of deer hunters on Arizona's Kaibab Plateau now hunt with non-lead or pack out all remains.
We know that hunters are the only ones that can solve this problem. So by pointing to them and saying you're doing a bad thing, that's not going to work. You need to appeal to their conservation ethic and their history of conservation and saying, here's yet another opportunity where we as hunters can leave a healthier environment for all of the critters that live in it, not just those that we hunt, for future generations to enjoy.
One day, Parrish hopes hunters across the country will shoot with alternative ammunition to protect all scavenging animals. Until then, he'll keep getting the word out to help get the lead out.